Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today we are talking about 10 rock bands that survived losing their lead singers. So just so you know, this article was put together by Screen Rant. I have just finished the video, but I wanted to let you know that I added one to the end because they didn't mention it. But there were other bands they didn't mention, obviously. Alice in Chains isn't mentioned, Journey isn't mentioned. This is Screen Rant's list. But I may do my own comprehensive list later. These are quick little videos I do during the week before I do my bigger videos that come out on the weekends. So thanks for joining me. Let's get started. There are many pitfalls that can await a band on their musical journey, but losing a lead singer is usually curtains for a band's career. Standing front and center to take all applause and criticism, it is a difficult balance to keep both a band and oneself on the straight and narrow. Be it through tragedy, incident, or classic trope of musical differences, losing a vocalist is such a difficult thing to survive for any musical ensemble. Despite losing the sound and aesthetic that so often characterizes an artist's output, not all bands are resigned to the scrap heap when their vocalists depart. There are a select few bands who went on to find success with a new frontman delivering classic records and sold-out shows all over the world. And we start with AC/DC, whose original singer was Bon Scott. When Angus Young in his schoolboy attire will forever be the public face of the band, Malcolm Young ran the show from day one. Dave Evans recorded one song before his arrival. The flame-throated, sin-inducing, untamable voice of Bon Scott was considered the heart and soul of AC/DC. Be it in the nudge and weak sexual innuendo, feeling as though you're part of a world's most dangerous and drunk gang in town, or needing a dirty deed to be done dirt cheap, Bon felt like he characterized so much of what makes AC/DC one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. And following his untimely passing in February 1980, AC/DC were determined to continue the band. After an audition process that included the names like Fat Lips, Alan Fryer, and Terry Slessler, who impressed when opening for the band with the Black Street Crawlers, AC/DC were recommended their new singer by Highway to Hell producer Mutt Lange. Bon Scott had been an admirer of Geordie vocalist Brian Johnson as well, and after he recorded vocals on the legendary Back in Black, well, the rest is history. Brian Johnson is a more playful but no less thrilling singer, and his years in AC/DC have been largely great. No kidding, man. Brian Johnson, what a beast. And of course, the infamous answer to, hey, how do you keep doing that voice after all these years? He goes, I didn't know I'd be doing it all these years. I painted myself into a corner. Queen at number 9, their original singer, the man himself, Freddie Mercury. Since the release of Bohemian Rhapsody biopic, Queen have literally never been bigger than they have been in the last half a decade. They have the unique advantage of having a back catalog of music that shrugged off the trends of time in favor of brave, fantastical ideas, and that keeps their music timeless. It's only fair that the band should share with its fans, despite the obvious missing factor. It has been a wise decision for the remaining members of Queen to not write any new material, opting instead to concentrate on touring. Queen are armed with one of the most impressive greatest hits collections in the history of rock music. In Adam Lambert, they have someone confident and talented enough to fill unfillable shoes. His personality, his voice, charisma, drama, and unique vocal flair ensures that Lambert does a great job of replacing the near irreplaceable Freddie Mercury. The live show is great, and Adam is magnificent, and so the show must go on. That being stated, they did put out one album post-Mercury. It is when they had ex-Bad Company and Free lead singer Paul Rodgers singing with them. They did Queen plus Paul Rodgers, We Are the Champions, a live album. Absolutely tremendous work. And though I guess technically they never released another Queen album, they did release a Queen plus Paul Rodgers album called The Cosmos Rocks. It's the only album that they've put out, and really I think the only studio album that they've put out even remotely related to Queen. However, The Cosmos Rocks, not a typical Queen album, is a brilliant and really, really good hard rock album. Paul Rodgers, obviously a tremendous singer. Queen, Roger Taylor, Brian May. fantastic instrumentalists and songwriters. So, I mean, I heard the song Say It's Not True. It was released, I don't know, about a half a year or so before the album came out. It was a great song. But like with a lot of older bands that are touring nowadays, no one wants to hear the new stuff. They just want to hear the hits. We move on with Black Flag, whose original singer was Keith Morris. Henry Rollins is one of the most impactful forebearers of hardcore. His book, Get in the Van, is a no-punches-pulled account of the dangers and hardship that came with touring in Black Flag through the early 80s. And on My War, Rollins personified the nihilistic tone of Black Flag and the album that would be one of the most influential for the bands of the early 90s alternative movement. That being said, Rollins himself will tell you he doesn't sing on the best Black Flag release. The First 4 Years is a compilation album that collects the earliest work of Black Flag and contains a grand total of 4 different vocalists. Keith Morris is the band's most famous early singer, who formed Circle Jerks after having a falling out with Black Flag guitarist Greg Ginn. There are also vocals from Ron Reyes, bassist Chuck Dukowski on one track, and Diz Cadena, who was the vocalist who wanted to switch to guitar that caused Rollins to join the band. It is an exhilarating album that is still nasty over 40 years after its initial release. Of course, we move on to number 7 with Pantera, whose original hair metal singer was Terry Glaze. Formed by the Abbott brothers, Vinnie and Daryl, Pantera were arguably the greatest metal band of the 90s. Their mixture of southern fried metal and inventing what would be known as groove metal, the stronger-than-all vocals of Phil Anselmo were a vital component in Pantera's success. There was, however, a much different story from before the band were flexing their vulgar displays of power. It's no great secret or source of shame that Pantera were a far more glam-leaning band in their early years. Original vocalist Terry Glaze was the right man for Pantera's Van Halen, Judas Priest worship on albums like Metal Magic, and Anselmo himself would start his time in Pantera on the equally glam album Power Metal, but it would be Anselmo and Cowboys from Hell that would change the band and heavy music's trajectory forever. I will say this, they may have looked glam on Power Metal, but they do not sound glam on Power Metal. That album title is apt. We move to number 6 with Genesis. Original lead singer was Peter Gabriel. Genesis are a band with 2 very successful but incredibly different eras and singers. Most of the world knows Genesis for their pop-leaning hits of the mid to late 80s and early 90s. The likes of Invisible Touch, Land of Confusion, and I Can't Dance became international mega hits, with the band's former drummer Phil Collins taking over vocals. He would take the mic in 1975 and continue their prog rock blueprint, but the band would embrace a more pop-leaning sound following Collins' massive solo career in the mid-80s. For their work in the 1970s, Genesis were considered prog rock legends for their work with Peter Gabriel on vocals. His arty stage aesthetics, conceptual lyrics, and flamboyant approach to vocals were ahead of their time. Genesis' work with Peter Gabriel was not commercially viable, but it continues to age impeccably. Lamb Lies Bleeding on Broadway, fan-freaking-tastic album. And of course, the first 4 Peter Gabriel solo albums really kind of carried forth the early Genesis sound. Genesis, amazing. I mean, right up there with Pink Floyd coming out of that era. Black Sabbath, the original lead singer, Ozzy Osbourne. Widely considered the band that gave birth to heavy metal, the Ozzy Osbourne-fronted lineup of Black Sabbath are one of the most respected bands of all time. Their melancholic narratives about war and demonic forces, doom-laden riffs, and anthemic songwriting and slongineering remain the cornerstones of heavy music. Osbourne's solo career might have had a great sense of fun, but his legacy with Black Sabbath is in evil and in darkness. Ronnie James Dio had already created a reputation for being one of the most technically gifted singers of the late 70s. His work with Elf and on hits like Man on the Silver Mountain with Rainbow were rightly heralded for his phenomenal range and power. Joining Black Sabbath after Osbourne, the Dio era of Sabbath has its own unique but beloved flavor. This personified by their reunion in the group Heaven and Hell in 2009. Sabbath would have other singers, most notably Ian Gillan and Tony Martin, but it's Dio whose work remains most acclaimed. Sabbath is an interesting band for me. I like Ozzy's solo stuff to a degree, and I like his Sabbath stuff to a degree. I like Dio's solo stuff more than I like his Sabbath stuff. However, all in all, over and over, my favorite era of Black Sabbath, and I know it's blasphemous to some, Mr. Tony Martin. Absolutely adore those albums. 5 albums of fantastic hard rock heavy metal. Electric Callboy original singer was Sebastian Sushi Biesler. German electro metalers Electric Callboy have been one of metal's standout successes in recent years. Their take no prisoners approach to party atmosphere and Electric Callboy's unrelenting Europop meets metal flavor sound like Limp Bizkit ate the Venga Boys. It's really that good. The likes of the irrepressible We Got the Moves and their recent collab with baby metal Ratata have become fun-fueled floor fillers in clubs and at festivals all over the globe. It's worth remembering that the band's fortunes changed entirely when they recruited unknown Nico Salach to the Rats and the Wolves. Sebastian Sushi Biesler had been with the band since their inception, but left to pursue darker sounds with his project Ghost Kid. Electric Callboy's first track with their new vocalist was the viral internet sensation Hypa Hypa in 2020, and the band have only gone from strength to strength since. Van Halen, their original singer, Diamond David Lee Roth. Eddie Van Halen and his brother Alex revolutionized rock music and the guitar itself in the late 70s, and Van Halen were a driving force behind the sound of the whole genre in the 80s. Most of Van Halen's definitive work was recorded with David Lee Roth on vocals, with the likes of Jump, Running with the Devil, Hot for Teacher, Ain't Talking About Love, and more becoming rock staples forever. Later years may not have been kind to the man's singing ability, but Diamond Dave has always been the life and soul of the party. The fact isn't to dismiss the band's following work. The incredible evolution of Van Halen undertook with Sammy Hagar yielded great results, though we can totally disregard their one album with Extreme Scary Sharon on vocals. Not fair to Mr. Sharon, but okay. 5150 is one of the best albums in Van Halen's arsenal, and while Hagar's voice may not have had the same sex and danger of Diamond Dave, his peerless power and range was more in keeping with the musicians in the band. It's understandable that if your Van Halen was about keg parties and unruly behavior, Van Hagar's more corporate Coca-Cola rock may have been a little nice. But are you really going to sneer at Pound Cake? Pound Cake, okay. Dreams. Why can't this be Love? Love Walks In. OU812, that album. Source of Infection. Finish What You Started. Shit. Go on and on. Hagar's awesome. Teach his own, I guess. At number 2, we have Iron Maiden with the indomitable Paul Di'Anno, may he rest in peace. On their first 2 albums, Iron Maiden had all of their trademarks that would go on to define the band as one of the most important heavy metal bands of all time. Their gallop was in spikier and more confrontational sound as they spearheaded the new wave of British heavy metal movement, and Eddie was front and center as the mascot that they still use to this day and who set the template for bands to utilize him. Vocalist Paul Di'Anno had attitude and spite, but Maiden needed something else to reach their goals. At the time fronting Samson, Bruce Dickinson joining Iron Maiden changed heavy metal forever. He left his band to join Iron Maiden in 1981 with Dickinson's theatrical and powerful human air raid siren approach, instantly changing the band's sound from his first work with the band, the classic Number of the Beast. Despite leaving the band and being replaced by Wolfsbane Blaze Bayley for a few years in the 90s, he still fronts the band in front of thousands of fans to this day. And we end with Fleetwood Mac. Original singer Peter Green, best known for Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham, and Christine McVie's six-legged trifecta of vocal awesomeness. Fleetwood Mac took a full 8 years before they found their definitive vocal lineup. focusing on popular, more charismatic and personality-driven vocal approach. The likes of Go Your Own Way, Rhiannon, and Don't Stop would go on to become some of the most popular rock songs in existence. Their popularity continues to find new generations, with TikTok embracing the band's hit Dreams a few years ago in a viral trend. It is an accepted fact that Fleetwood Mac's early blues-driven years are considered their best work in some quarters. Peter Green was Fleetwood Mac's creative hub for essential hits like Black Magic Woman and Albatross, before he would leave the band in a chemical haze in 1970. Jeremy Spencer, Danny Carowan, Bob Welch, and most notably Christine McVie would deputize before Buckingham's and Nicks joined the band and changed the face of popular rock music forever. Now, one band that did not make this list, and I'm surprising because I cold read these if you're sticking around this long, and the band that is a huge impact on me is, of course, Judas Priest, whose original lead singer was Rob Halford. After the Painkiller Tour ended in 1991, there were indications of internal tensions within the band. Halford went on to form a street-stylish thrash metal group named Fight, with Scott Travis on drums for the recording session. He formed this band to explore new musical territory, but due to contractual obligations, he remained with Judas Priest until May 1992. In his 2020 memoir Confess, Halford blamed his departure on a miscommunication rather than an intentional desire to quit the band. Halford collaborated with Judas Priest in the release of the compilation album entitled Metalworks 73-93 to commemorate their 20th anniversary. He also appeared in a video by the same title documenting their history, in which his departure from the band was officially announced later that year. The remaining members of Judas Priest spent the next few years searching for a replacement for Halford. Known singers who auditioned for or were offered to join the band during the second period included Steve Grimmett of Grim Reaper, Ralph Sheepers of Primal Fear and Gamma Ray, Whitfield Crane of Ugly Kid Joe, former Accept singer David Reese, and the then unknown Devin Townsend. Tim Ripper Owens, who had previously sung in Winter's Bane and a Judas Priest tribute band called British Steel, was hired in 1996 as Judas Priest's new singer. This lineup released 2 studio albums, Jugulator in 1997. In 1999, the song Bullet Train was nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Metal Performance, and Demolition in 2001. A considerable stylistic departure from prior releases, the former has been characterized as groove metal, and the latter as nu metal, both receiving mixed reviews. The lineup also gave us 2 double live albums, 98 Live Meltdown and Live in London in 2003, the latter of which had a live DVD counterpart. But after 11 years apart and faced with an ever-growing demand for a reunion, Judas Priest and Rob Halford announced they would reunite in 2003 to coincide with the release of Metalology box set, despite Halford's earlier insistence that he would never do it. They did a concert tour in Europe in 2004 and co-headlined the 2004 Ozfest, being named as the premier act by almost all U.S. media coverage of the event. Judas Priest and Ripper Owens parted amicably, with Owens joining American heavy metal band Iced Earth. And Halford continues to be the frontman for Judas Priest to this day. So that is our list. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.